So going into 2025, this is probably the most hyped up camera out there, the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. And in today's video, I want to go over the pros and cons of this camera and figure out if it's really worth all the hype in a non-biased and non-sponsored by DJI way. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the videos out there on YouTube has an affiliation with the company making the product, so I wanted to try it out for myself and give y'all real feedback from someone who doesn't have an interest in saying nice things about the product. But today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. Now, a super quick backstory on the inspiration for this video. Way back in the day, I want to say it was 2016, 2017, I had the original DJI Osmo. This thing was definitely not pocket sized, but it was basically the same concept. It was this gimbal-like thing with a camera attached to it, and you could also mount your phone to it, and I actually really liked it, especially back in those days. There weren't as many products out there for video that made your life easier. It was the early days of gimbals. Back then, people were still using glide cams, so I personally thought it was a really cool product. The only issue with it was that it broke multiple times. I had one break, I had to return it to the Best Buy that I bought it at, and then I had another break, had to return that one, and at that point I didn't want to get a third because I thought Best Buy was gonna ban me from the store because I kept returning these things. And from there, I was a little bit turned off from mounted camera systems by DJI, and I never even really took notice to the release of this Pocket 3. It just flew under the radar for me. So I went ahead and picked one up for myself, and right out of the box, the first thing I did was what I call the 90% test. This is a test of the camera, basically pushing it to where 90% of people would use it. Based on my interpretation of how people are using this thing and how it's presented on social media, it seems like a lot of people are using this for more basic vlog type stuff, more day in the life stuff, maybe social media content. So I filmed the most cliche sequence you could film, me making a cup of coffee. And going into this test, my expectations were extremely low, but once I got the files in the computer and I did a little bit of color grading to them, I was definitely impressed. It exceeded those very low expectations that I had. Now with this initial sequence, the first thing I did was put the camera in pro mode, and I made sure to set my settings to what I'm used to with other cameras. I did 10-bit log, and I made sure to shoot in 4K. Now, color grading this log footage was pretty similar to other cameras that I would use. The workflow wasn't very different. One thing that I did notice was skin tones were a little tricky to work with. I still got to dial that in a little bit, but other than that, all I had to do was turn down the LUTs that I used, and the color grade was simple and easy. So I would go ahead and label that the first positive of the Pocket 3, just how simple it is to use. Someone who's picking this up for the first time, maybe to get into videography, maybe they're trying to do some social media content creation, they'd be able to figure out how to get really good results with this camera with minimal effort. You're not going to have to spend hours watching tutorials to figure out how to get something good out of this camera. So the simplicity of this was great, and I really liked it. Now, my initial plan with this camera was to take it to CES with me. Las Vegas is where CES is hosted every year. I had to go there to work with Honda, but unfortunately we had a giant snowstorm, or expected to be giant snowstorm. It wasn't very big in Atlanta, so I flew to Vegas. I was there for about 5 hours to work with Honda, and then I took a red-eye home. So I didn't have very many opportunities to use this on that trip other than the drive to the airport and the drive home from the airport. But something I noticed in this test is definitely the second positive of this camera, which is the built-in stabilization. The fact that you can get stabilized footage with this camera so easily beats out basically any other option out there. Your iPhone has decent stability, but nothing compared to the fact that this has essentially a gimbal built into it. Your camera, obviously, if you attached it to, say, a DJI Ronin, you would get really smooth footage, but having the ability to just grab this and get something really smooth, really stable right off the bat is a huge positive. It's what makes this such a special camera, and I think it's one of the big reasons why everyone is hyping it up so much. And on top of that, the brief little low light test I did when it was snowing really surprised me. This footage looked great, and it's something that I could use in pretty much all the content that I make online, and it would fit in very well. So that right there is the second positive. The fact that you can do so much with this camera that would otherwise be very difficult to do with something like an iPhone or your mirrorless camera. And the fact that the joystick on here gives you control over the gimbal allows you to do some really cool things that, once again, would otherwise be really difficult to do with other tools. Now, speaking of things that are normally really difficult to do that are easy with the Pocket 3, with subject tracking built into this camera, as well as the DJI app you can use with this camera, you can create create shots that otherwise would be extremely difficult to do by yourself. Essentially, you have almost a two-man crew with just one person and your iPhone and your camera, meaning you can track things like a car, you can track yourself walking through a frame, and you can get really unique, interesting looks to your videos that otherwise would be extremely difficult. Typically, someone like me who films a lot of their videos by themselves is stuck creating static shots and focusing on composition, and you don't have a lot of camera movement to your footage. But with this, you can create much more unique angles and create something that's a little bit more compelling. Now, the fourth big positive of the Osmo Pocket 3 is the fact that with its size and weight, you can get shots that otherwise might be very difficult to do with a mirrorless camera or even an iPhone. The fact that this camera weighs so little means that you can mount it to, say, a Joby GorillaPod, and you can put it in a number of different situations, and you can control it through the app. So you can hang this thing essentially from the ceiling, and you can have control over where the camera is pointed. You can track a subject, you can start and stop your record time, which is something that is a lot more tedious to do with a mirrorless camera. So the fact that this thing is so small and it's so lightweight, it just makes it easier to put it in situations that are much more creative without all the headaches that come with setting up those compositions with other cameras. Now, the fifth big positive of the Osmo Pocket 3 is the image quality from the camera. When you compare this to my Nikon Z8, the files look relatively similar. The Z8 is better. It's a mirrorless camera. It has higher resolution. It has a lens on there that can control some of the quality, but side by side, I didn't mind the way the Osmo looked, especially when you factor in the convenience and the stabilization of this camera. And when you have it side by side with the iPhone, like I already mentioned, is stabilized, but the footage doesn't look anywhere near as good as the Osmo Pocket, even just straight out of camera without a color grade. I definitely prefer the Osmo versus the iPhone when they're side by side. Now, the final big positive of the Pocket 3 is stuff that is relatively obvious if you've done any minor research online. One is the price point. The fact that this is reasonably priced at around $500 just for the camera makes it something that is very unique in the marketplace. You're typically not going to find a gimbal camera that has the output that this does, all the creative versatility that this has for that price. It's realistically less expensive than an iPhone, and people buy iPhones all day. So this is a great entry point for anyone who's trying to get into video. And then when you factor in the creative combo kit, where you get the extra battery, you get the tripod mount, you get the microphone that can connect to the camera, you get an all-around creative machine for under $700, and that's really hard to beat, especially when you compare it to, once again, the cost of mirrorless cameras and even your iPhone if you were going to put all the accessories that were necessary on an iPhone to turn it into a cinema camera. With that said, there are some negatives that come with the Osmo Pocket 3. The biggest negative is the fact that you are locked into one focal length with this camera. Now, the focal length is good. I think it's going to be great for vlogging. It's going to be great for that day-to-day documentary style video that most people are using this for, but it takes away some versatility of this being a more pro tool. Overall, that is one of the biggest negatives, and there's a few other small ones that I want to talk about after I thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. And while I'm thanking Squarespace, there's going to be more footage shot on the Pocket 3, so you can just see what it's all about. So if you're a creator watching this video, I'm sure you have big goals for 2025, and no one makes it easier to accomplish these goals than Squarespace and a professional looking website. Maybe you're someone who's looking to showcase your work and have a way to share all the beautiful things you're making with the world. Squarespace allows you to easily create a portfolio, and I have a video on this channel breaking down exactly how I built mine on evanramp.com. It's linked in the description down below under a tab called Website Resources. Or maybe you're looking to sell things like photo books like I do, or presets, or LUTs. You can do this easily through Squarespace, and Squarespace makes it simple to process payments with Squarespace Payments. Or maybe you're someone who's looking to book more clients. You can create a contact me page on your website so clients can get in contact with you easily, and it feels more professional going through a website. I actually booked that job with Honda at CES through the contact me page on evanramp.com. And on this channel, under the website resources tab, I have a video breaking down how I built my website. Check it out for yourself. Follow one of those tutorials linked in the description down below, and you can go to squarespace.com/evanramp to start a free trial and use code evanramp to save 10% at checkout. That's squarespace.com/evanramp to start a free trial and use code evanramp to save 10% at checkout when you send your site live or purchase your your first domain. Big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Now, the second big negative with the Pocket 3 is the same issue that I had with the original Osmo, which is the fact that this is not the most robust camera. If you're in a situation where it's raining, this just feels like something that is gonna get broken in heavy rain. Maybe a little bit of drizzle, you'd be okay, but personally, I wouldn't trust it. Also, the fact that there is a gimbal on here and there's this mechanism that's moving, that always means that there's an opportunity for something to get damaged with dust, with corrosion, or with you simply just bumping the camera in a way that you don't expect. So I definitely recommend using the case that comes with this camera when you throw it in your bag, but unfortunately that leads to the next negative point, which is when you're using the case to protect the camera, it's not exactly pocket sized. This is not the most convenient thing ever, especially when you compare it with an iPhone. If you're someone who wants to protect your camera and you don't want to deal with this, you do need to look into other case options online, which there are ones that just protect the gimbal and they make it much smaller. Now, my final issue with the Osmo Pocket 3 is the fact that you need the app and your iPhone to really get the most out of this camera. Now, you can use the screen that is built into the camera, but the screen is extremely small. And if you're doing more intricate shots, maybe you're trying to follow focus, you're trying to do something a little bit more than just vlogging and looking at the camera and holding it, you need the app to get the most out of it. You need the app to utilize Pro Mode to set your settings and just really see what you're doing. Now, is that the end of the world? No, I think most people are okay with using an app, but it is something for me that isn't always something I want to do. I don't always want to have to connect to Bluetooth. I want to be able to use the camera right away with what's in front of me. And for more advanced things, the screen on here and the functionality of the Osmo Pocket 3 isn't exactly enough. If I only had this camera with the screen, I wouldn't use it as much as I'm going to find myself using it because I have access to the app. It just makes everything so much easier. So those are all my thoughts on the Osmo Pocket 3. Now, is this worth the hype in 2025? Now, typically, I am usually skeptical of products that have so much internet hype around them, but with this one, I think it's worth all the hype. This hits the perfect intersection of versatility, convenience, and image quality all in a device that's relatively inexpensive when you look at it relative to what's out there in the camera world. This is a device that no matter what your skill level is, there's a way that you can use it. So if you're a complete beginner getting into social media video, this is a great avenue to do that without spending a ton of money. Or if you're someone like me who primarily shoots on mirrorless cameras, but you're always looking for a way to get more creative shots, to have things be more convenient as a small crew. Maybe you're looking to get into more behind the scenes footage for social media. This is something that you can use as well. It pretty much fits across the board for all people making any type of video out there, from complete beginners to people who are professionals. There's some way that you can use this camera. So for me, the hype is warranted just based off that fact alone. There's gonna be some way that everyone can use this camera, and I think that's why people are talking about it so much. You can be a beginner, you can be an absolute pro, but you're still going to find some cool, unique thing that you can do with the Osmo Pocket 3. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you have this camera? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you are not yet, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.